Good evening. My name is Greg Vizilla. I'm the rector of Holy Trinity South River, also dean of the Northern Convocation of Churches. Welcome. Buenas noches. Buenas noches. And we're so glad you're here today. I also want to greet those who are part of our live stream. Just do a little geography for you in TV land. We're here in South River, Middlesex County, exit 9 on the Turnpike. So put a pin on the map and come visit sometime. I'm going to introduce now the gentleman who will be our MC for the evening, Jack Doherty of the Episcopal Transition Committee. Sir.
Would you join with me in our opening prayer, which is composed by Reverend Maria Sanzo, chaplain of the Search Committee? Let us pray. God of all, hold the Diocese of New Jersey in the palm of your hand during this time of discernment. Help us to come together as sisters and brothers of Jesus Christ, listening to one another with open hearts and open minds. Enter into our conversations and make them holy, and lead us into a peaceful place of unity as we search for our new bishop. Amen. Amen. As Father Greg mentioned, my name is Jack Doherty. I am from the Church of the Good Shepherd in Pittman and a member of the Diocesan Transition Committee for the election of the 13th Bishop of New Jersey. On behalf of that committee, we also want to welcome you to Holy Trinity Church in South River. It is a pleasure to be here with you all and with our candidates for the next Bishop of New Jersey. I want to particularly thank everyone here at Holy Trinity for their gracious hospitality this evening. As to our format, we will be giving each of the candidates an opportunity to introduce themselves and to answer questions that were submitted on the Transition Committee website. These questions were submitted by interested clergy and lay people and represented a wide range of topics. I do want to say here at the outset that the candidates have not been given the specific questions that are going to be asked tonight. However, they were provided a list of 66 potential questions. We felt that to be fair. And it also gives our 5 candidates a chance to see the topics that are important to all of you, the people of the Diocese of New Jersey. Throughout all of the forums, the candidates will be answering our questions individually. That is to say, they will be here with us one at a time, with the others sequestered in another part of the building. We will ask the same 5 questions of each candidate, with the exception of Reverend Janine Scanone, due to an oversight at this afternoon's question and answer period in Church of the Ascension, Gloucester City. A question to her was overlooked. Therefore, she will be answering a 6th question this evening and given an additional amount of time. The order in which the candidates will be presenting was chosen randomly last night. In the interest of time, there will be no questions taken from the floor. Following this forum, 30 minutes have been set aside for you to meet and greet the candidates. Additionally, we have 3x5 cards available that if a question has occurred to you this evening that you would like the Transition Committee to consider including in one of the later sessions this week. With that, let's begin. The Reverend Dr. Mauricio J. Wilson is currently the rector of St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Oakland, California.
Thank you, good evening, and buenas tardes a los que están escuchando esta transmisión en español.
First question is, how will you support diversity, equity, and inclusion, and similar efforts in the diocese?
I think the most important thing about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I will add justice, DEIJ, is first and foremost to be intentional. I believe that the only way the efforts of diversity, equity, and inclusion can happen is if we make it our intention when we do whatever it is we are going to do. For example, if I were to be the one elected as your bishop, I would make sure that the staff that I surround myself with reflects the diversity not only of the diocese, but of God's kingdom. I would want also that the leadership in all the different places and parts of the diocese to also reflect that diversity. I think that it is our responsibility as the church to be the banner bearers of these efforts. And we have to show out of that conversation. It is a stronger and more whole concept that we're working with. So I feel that my conversation is, I am going to do everything on my side. You would see me making it happen by the people who surround me. And therefore, when I say, let us make it the same thing for every project that we try to do, it won't be, oh, you're talking about it, but you're not doing it. I would have done it myself first, so that therefore others can feel comfortable. I don't mind having people in my leadership team that don't agree with everything I do. I actually love it, because then I have the voices in my head and in my presence saying, I don't think that's a good idea. And I can say, explain to me why. And if they're right, then I can change my mind, right? So I think that is an important aspect of having everybody in the room who is different from the others, so that we can hear these perspectives and come out with projects and programs that are actually more holistic once we put them into implementation.
According to Matthew 25, we shall be judged by our feeding the hungry, refreshing the thirsty, welcoming strangers, clothing the naked, and visiting the sick and imprisoned. Please give examples of your leadership in this work, and in particular, in assisting prisoners.
Well, to be honest with you, I haven't done much of that ministry at all, the prison ministry in particular. The prison system in the area where I live is very secluded. If you remember, I live in the Bay Area, and the big prison that we had, well, it's closed now, but it was the island. What is it named again? Alcatraz. And that is the vision of jails in the Bay Area. They're secluded, they're removed, they're not close to you. When immigrants are detained, the places where they're taken is about an hour away from where they may have been detained. So we have been participating, I have been personally participating with those visits to prisons where immigrants who have been detained are being held. But even there, you have to have a permission like 3 weeks before to go see somebody. It is very restrictive in that sense. But I do think that the efforts that groups are doing in our area are important, because we're trying to, along with several coalitions in Oakland and in San Francisco, to find ways to make the concept of putting people whose crime is crossing the border into heavily guarded prisons doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make sense. The crime is not killing somebody, it's crossing a line. We need to find ways to better manage that than putting people behind bars or behind concrete walls and bulletproof glass. The other thing that we're doing is trying to work with their families. The families of those who are taken into custody suffer greatly, because in many cases, these are the main breadwinners of the house, who are detained when they're trying to get work during the day. And all the family hears from somebody is, such and such was detained and they were taken away. And when they say where, they will say, we don't know. And so working with that type of ministry, with those groups of advocacy, and being able to go to immigration office and immigration courts and be translators, be people of support for those individuals is part of what we are trying to do. St. Paul's, a few years back, declared itself a sanctuary congregation as well. Back in the 80s, St. Paul's was also a place where the Cambodian refugees came for ministry. So the history of this place where I do ministry now with immigrants and jails has been a long one. But we have not been able, because of the way that the more high crime places have been removed from us, we have not been able to really do a lot for them. We did have a young man a few years back from our congregation who was imprisoned because of a robbery, a bank robbery. And he was sent south of California, about 3,000 miles from where his family lived. So what we did is that we started a ministry of letter writing, and we wrote letters to him, encouraging him to keep the faith, to keep it up, to not give up, to keep his head up and try to do better. Thankfully, he was released from prison 2 years ago, and he started coming back to church again. So, we do as much as we possibly can with the system, the way it is set up in our particular area.
The Episcopal Church is challenged with a rising age of clergy, average age of clergy, and yet we seem to be ordaining fewer young priests and clergy of color. Church-wide, due in part to the unsustainable rise in higher education costs and a systemic barrier against younger postulants, aspirants, on the grounds that they lack life experience. How will you encourage and support young people discerning a call to the priesthood or diaconate if elected bishop?
I think the key element in that question is where it says the systemic barriers that have been set up for younger vocations. That is where we need to do a lot of work. We need to eliminate those systemic barriers. We should never tell a young person who comes and says to us, I think that God is calling me to the ordained ministry. Okay, go, do something else for a while and then come back.
How are we going to do that?
When I first mentioned so I was thinking about it from about age 12, but I didn't actually say it out loud until I was 14. And basically what happened at that point is that people started taking me in. And they said, come. The altar guild ladies at my church said, come, you need to know what happens inside this room. And they taught me all the things about altar guild. And then when I was 17, one of my wife's uncle-in-laws needed someone to come preach at one of the churches he was responsible for. And he called my dad and he said, I'm looking for somebody who can come preach for New Year's Eve. And he said, well, I have somebody, but he's kind of young, and Mauricio is like, oh, yeah, send them. That's awesome, send them. So my first sermon was when I was 17 years old, because my dad and another friend of his who were also priests thought, what do we have to lose, right? And I've been preaching ever since. And all through my life as a young person, even though I then went off to college to study accounting, all through that time, I was being invited to churches to come and preach, to come and lead retreats, to come and do all these things that were encouraging me to consider that this was truly a call from God. So how do we do it? If a young person comes to you and says, I think God is calling me to this, say, okay, come share some ministry with us. If they end up not doing it, okay, that's great. That is not on you. But how great it is if so many of these young people who later in life, after they have done college, after they had worked in industry, after they have gotten married, had children, raised them and all of this, and had grandchildren, go, you know that call I had at 14, it's still there. How much more could this person have done in the preaching of the gospel if somebody, when they were 14, had said, come and do ministry with us. You can keep doing that other stuff, but this can become your primary way of living. So encourage your vocations. Encourage it. We need to eliminate that barrier that we set so many years ago for young people to really go into what is the ministry of the church. People talk about the young people as the church of tomorrow. It's today. It's today right now, and we need to encourage that more.
Based on what you know, name 2 or 3 strengths of our diocese and how you will leverage those strengths. Then, please name 2 or 3 challenges and how you will address those challenges.
Wow. I would say that the most important strong point of this diocese is courage. What I saw in your profile is the courage to face the things that you need to work through. You didn't hide it. You didn't say, the race thing, we got it. We got it covered. No. We are doing anti-racism work because we know that it is something that needs to change. We're doing work and training more lay and deacons because we know that the church without the work of the lay people and the deacons is not going to survive. All of these things are things that show me that you have courage. That you have courage to face the fact that you are being called to do ministry. And that it is only by facing the realities of the places that we're not fulfilling our destiny or our call that we're going to change the course of history. Not only for this diocese, but I believe for the Episcopal Church and for the world. Courage is one of them. Of course, as I'm mentioning some of those, the work with anti-racism. I think, I don't know if you're aware of this, but this year's the 55th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And we're still talking about needing to do work on anti-racism. That is disappointing from my perspective. But I find hope in the fact that this diocese is doing the work that needs to be done so that we can be the examples and the catalyst for the change that so many people died and gave their lives for all of these years. It takes courage, it takes hope to do this work and be the example for the rest of the world and the church. The third, and I mentioned it, is also the work with training more deacons and lay leaders. The church cannot depend on the work of a bishop and what I'm going to call a handful of priests. Because in a diocese of this size, 86 priests is only a handful. We need more people in the orders of the diaconate and the laity that are strong leaders, trained, empowered, and sent out to do the work of ministry that we are called to do as a church. Weaknesses or things that growth areas, I think, as I think about it, I couldn't find many, but my hope, I'm going to assume this, that there is probably some pushback on certain things. I can only imagine that from the perspective of some clergy, the idea of giving deacons more authority and power may be frightening because they're not sure what that's going to mean for them. I can imagine that there are people who are thinking, why do we have to keep talking about racial issues? Aren't we over it? I think these things are natural human reactions to change. And we need to work with the fact that change happens all the time in life. The only thing constant in the world is change. And if we help each other go through that and nurture each other and shepherd each other through the idea of coming to a place where we can be better human beings, better Christians for the evangelization of the world, it is a good thing. It is a good thing. I was speaking to someone a few minutes ago about the idea that I'm wondering why would there be any priest who wouldn't want a bigger support system around them so that they can have the time to take their day off, take their vacation days, take their sabbaticals, have the time to apply for a sabbatical grant, right? So much of the effort of the things that we try to do and we cannot do is because we simply run out of time. Because when we are one-person leadership teams, There is just no amount of energy or time that can allow us to do everything that we want to do and everything we also need to do for ourselves.
How and why is the Holy Spirit calling you to lead the Diocese of New Jersey?
Oh, wow. I would want to venture to say that, why didn't that question go to the Holy Spirit? I'm still discerning why. But what I can say about that from my perspective is that, and you may have read this somewhere, I think I wrote it somewhere, that ever since I was a young man, I'm going to say 13 or 14, 15, somewhere around there, I decided to say yes to God's call. And over the years, over the last 40 plus years, I have made it a point that when God says go, I say where. I don't ask why. I just say where. And my wonderful partner in life, Carla, don't run. I'm not going to ask you to come up here and say anything. She always turns to me and says, Mauricio, God has not steered us wrong at any point so far. Say yes, because whatever God wants us to do, God will take care of the details. I think that God calls. And God has put before my life the experiences, the learning that I have needed to do, the partnershiping that I've needed to do, the little knowledge of school and so on and so forth that I've had to do. And I am ready to say, God, if New Jersey is where you want me to be, send the movers and I'll be on my way. Send the movers and I'll be on my way. And the family, just so that you're aware, we have these conversations at home. Our kids are now 18 and 15. And before saying yes to any new stage in this process, we have asked them, how do you feel about this? How would you feel about this? As I already told you what Carla's response is, my kid's response is, Daddy, you'll be good at it. So why would you say no? And so that's the way I'm looking at it. I don't have all the answers. Never will I have all the answers. And when people have asked me, why would you do this and how would you see yourself doing this? My response is that if I am the one called to be the 13th Bishop of the Diocese of New Jersey, I guarantee you that I will be the best 13th Bishop of New Jersey you will ever meet. That is the only full guarantee that I can give you.
Thank you, Father Mauricio.
Thank you.
Our next candidate will be the Reverend Janine Scanone. The Reverend Scanone is currently the rector of Good Samaritan Episcopal Church in San Diego, California. And please take note again, as was mentioned at the beginning, she will be asked an additional question that was overlooked this afternoon, so she will have 6 questions and therefore also additional time.
Good evening, everybody. I'm very grateful to be here. Buenas noches. Estoy muy agradecida por su presencia y el apoyo de la Iglesia de Santa Trinidad. Vamos.
What new and hopeful perspectives and ideas can you bring to the conversation about church decline that support and encourage long-term solutions?
Well, the main hope and support that I can provide is Jesus and the Holy Spirit. One of the things I like to say to people who talk about the church dying or declining is that neither can actually happen, because the church is the mystical body of Christ, and that will never die. And it is empowered by the Holy Spirit, who will never let it die. Now, what might happen to attendance at times, or the conditions of buildings at times may change, And that's, I think, what you're asking me. But the church cannot die and never will die. So the hopeful thing that I have for you is that what COVID has shown us is who was coming to church because they needed to be there for the presence of Christ in their midst as the body of Christ out there, and for the presence of Christ present in the sacraments, in the body and blood of Christ. People who decided to stop coming to church were people who had been coming for another reason and found that reason fed by other things. So, one, for that type of church, which is people gathering for worship on Sundays and fellowship and formation, what we have is an entire population of this country that is more and more growing up unchurched, and so what we have is a field ripe for seeding. And the hopeful perspective I have is that I see more and more Episcopalians not shying away from the word evangelism anymore, and understanding that evangelism is actually the sharing of the good news. It is basically bearing testimony, bearing witness to the hope that we have within us with gentleness and respect. I'm quoting 1 Peter. With gentleness and respect. If you think of the way most people imagine evangelism, like what they've seen on TV, they don't hear gentleness and respect. They hear, come to Jesus or you will burn in hell. Now, none of us would say that, but a lot of us in the Episcopal Church have not been saying anything else, which is, let me tell you how my relationship with Jesus has changed my life, sustained me in grief, saved my marriage, got me off drugs or alcohol, got my kid out of trouble. Those are the stories that people need to hear, and more I'm hearing that happen through the work of beloved communities, through the Embracing Evangelism courses being offered by the Episcopal Church, and that is going to be the seed that gets planted in the United States. The hope is in what the Episcopal Church, I'm sorry, I'm not handling the mic well, but the hope is what the Episcopal Church offers, which is a gospel message that is directly centered on what Jesus said. I am your friend, and I come here to tell you that you are an equal child of God just as you are. And I've redeemed you. And those words are transforming in and of themselves. But what we also find when we gather is that it is our love for one another that grows across our differences, whether they're political or religious or cultural, that change us, that make us grow. I've been changed by every relationship I've had at church, but most of all by the people with whom I disagree. And this is the great hope that we have to offer the church in the United States and across the world. You see our church growing increasingly diverse, increasingly bold. We are the church that accepts everybody. You know it and I know it. You can see it in this room. And that is the good news that people need to hear. Was that the extra question?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Excellent.
How will you support diversity, equity, and inclusion and similar efforts in the diocese?
Well, one of the things that you said you need in the diocese is more leaders of all type, lay leaders, ordained leaders from a variety of walks of life and cultural backgrounds and linguistic backgrounds. And so one of the things that we need to do is look at the way we recruit leaders and examine them for any unconscious bias. It's been well proven by studies that in job search environments and recruiting environments and hiring environments of all sorts, that there's a lot of unconscious bias in recruiting and hiring decisions. And so one of the things we could do is call in organizations that look at that unconscious bias and help identify it for us if it exists. The second thing to do is to remove barriers to people being trained, whether for lay leadership or for ordained leadership. Some of the examples I've given in other venues is that, for example, in San Diego, what we did to help people who were Spanish-speaking only candidates for diaconate priesthood was to have them work with the Seminary of Western Mexico, which had Zoom versions and online versions of their classes, and so they could learn in Spanish and get equipped that way for leadership. Was it about, remind me of the question, I want to make sure I'm answering what you asked.
How will you support diversity, equity, and inclusion and similar efforts in the diocese?
In addition, The other kind of diversity we need to think about is age groups. So we know that a lot of church communities don't have as many children coming in as we would like, and there are challenges. I don't know about here in New Jersey, but in San Diego, sports are happening on Sundays, and that is why we are not seeing kids at church. So clearly, we need to offer other kinds of offerings, whether we're coming and doing prayer circles at the sporting events, or whether we are offering formation events in midweek or whatever, in some way to reach out to people who can't possibly access things when we're doing them. Another typical problem we found in San Diego was that we wanted a variety of people on our committees, but we were having committees during the middle of the week, in the middle of the day. Well, that's when working people are working, so you're only going to get retired people in your committees. I just dropped the mic, the live stream mic. I'm really sorry. Yeah, mic drop, exactly. Boom. Take that away from me. Okay, thank you. I was saying...
About daytime committees.
Yeah. So I said, well, maybe we should have, if you're trying to get working people, how about if we have committee meetings on Saturdays? And I saw the faces drop, but that would inconvenience me. But if you want diversity and equity and inclusion, you have got to inconvenience yourself. Inconvenience yourself. That is the only way it's going to happen. And in hiring procedures in the bishop's office, now I noted that there was only one, and it's a part-time employee who speaks Spanish. And in a diocese with so many Latino ministries, I would hope that we would have more people who can speak some Spanish in the bishop's office as well.
According to Matthew 25, we shall be judged by our feeding the hungry, refreshing the thirsty, welcoming strangers, clothing the naked, and visiting the sick and imprisoned. Please give examples of your leadership in this work, and in particular, in assisting prisoners.
The prisoners that I have directly assisted were people who were being deported or were being held in a federal prison right at the border between San Diego and Tijuana, being threatened with deportation, as well as people who had just come across the border in San Diego during 2017 and 2018 seeking asylum. And all of them needed legal help. So while immigration of that sort is a real hot-button issue in our society, and it was at my church that people were very divided about the issues facing us in 2017 and 2018 regarding immigration, what I found fascinating is that when I reached out to my congregation to provide real practical help, when people were already here, had already been admitted by the Border Patrol, people with very different opposing views on this matter jumped to help. When I put out, maybe in the diocesan newsletter, that we needed donations for immigration lawyers, dollars came pouring in. I think I got, they sent them to Good Samaritan Episcopal Church, care of Janine, to give to the lawyers. And I want to say that in about 6 months' time, we got about $30,000 worth of donations, including from Minnesota and New York and Georgia. And I didn't even know who these people were. They had just heard somehow, maybe through the ENS, that this was happening. We also provided other types of help. And I found people driving up, knocking on the church door because we were accepting diapers and baby food and clothing for people coming across the border. And people were coming with truckloads of the stuff. Truckloads. And I know you think of California as liberal, but actually San Diego can be a quite conservative part of the state. And once again, people who had very different political views were not at all differentiated when it came to providing real and practical help. So I was not allowed. I was asked to provide pastoral care to somebody actually in prison, to go to him physically, and I was not permitted to do that at the time. So I was having phone calls with a man who was having panic attacks at the idea of being returned to Mexico. His son had been killed, and he'd been threatened, and he was trying to move to California to live with his other son. So that was the very real help I provided in a very tense time for that man.
The Episcopal Church is challenged with a rising average age of clergy, and yet we seem to be ordaining fewer younger priests and clergy of color church-wide, due in part to the unsustainable rise in higher education costs and a systemic barrier against younger postulants aspirants on the grounds that they lack life experience. How will you encourage and support young people discerning a call to the priesthood or diaconate if elected bishop?
Yeah, you're looking at a woman who had to sell her house and take on loans to go to seminary. First of all, I think you're already seeing trends in seminaries to have non-residential seminaries. CDSP in California has done it. GTS, General Theological Seminary in New York, is now having a hybrid model. Already the official Episcopal seminaries are clear that they're going to have to do something else besides asking people to stop working for 3 years and attend a residential seminary. That alone is going to reduce the cost. In addition, there are seminaries, and Seminary of the Southwest is one of these, that are providing things like the Iona School, which has video classes for people so they can be working full-time in whatever their current occupation is, raising their families, saving up to buy a home or to pay off the student loans from their undergraduate education, so that they can attend seminary part-time or even full-time and not have to stop working to obtain the necessary credentials. And that's not the wave of the future, that's already happening. One of the things that we're doing in the Diocese of California, in 3 dioceses in California, that's the Diocese of Northern California, El Camino Real, and San Diego, is that we had several Spanish-speaking leaders who wanted training for the diaconate or the priesthood, but there was a language barrier and an expense barrier. So what we're doing for them is we're partnering together with the Seminary of Southwest for them to get Spanish language seminary level classes from an approved Episcopal seminary. Video classes, very inexpensive, and the seminaries are the dioceses are sharing the cost, and we are paying for their classes and their books. It's a minimal cost, a relatively minimal cost. So they're basically going to get their seminary free of charge. In addition, several seminaries, Berkeley Divinity School at Yale, CDSP, and others, VTS, are committing to paying all tuition and sometimes all of the housing costs. So it's already happening. In terms of encouraging people of color, people of African descent, and Latino and Asian people to enter ministry, once again, we need to look at our unconscious biases. I'll give you an example. There's a young Chinese man from the People's Republic of China who's a graduate student at the University of California, San Diego, and is a member of my church, a very active member of my church. He did not know Jesus before he came to the United States because he was not permitted to know Jesus in the People's Republic of China. And something told him to walk in the door of our church 2 years ago. He asked to serve on the vestry, and I said, I'd like to talk to you about that, why you want to do it. And meanwhile, I informed some vestry members that he was interested in this. And they expressed a concern because it has a very heavy accent. And so I said, well, what are your other concerns? And then I went back to them and I said, sometimes if you want diversity in a population, and we do want diversity in our church, then you need to inconvenience yourself by, for example, asking Christopher to say it again slowly. I frequently have to ask Christopher to say it again slowly. He has a very pronounced Chinese accent. But when he says it again slowly, I can understand him quite well. And when I asked him why he wanted to serve on the vestry, he said that he already served the church on Sundays. He runs the live stream, and he helps with the coffee hour, and he's an usher, all on the same Sunday. And he said, right now, I serve the church only on Sundays. On the vestry, I can serve the whole church all the time. I know. See? And that's when I realized I absolutely am going to have him apply to be elected to the vestry. So that's an example of the unconscious ways that people keep people who are perfectly suited. There are times when we have to look past, say, the bachelor's degree that would normally be expected and look at people's other life preparations and where they've come from and what gifts they have to offer the church. And then look beyond the traditional expectations, which tend to be aligned with a 1950s culture.
Based on what you know, name 2 or 3 strengths of our diocese and how you will leverage those strengths. Then, please name 2 or 3 challenges and how you will address those challenges.
I'm going to look at my notes because I thought about this a lot and I don't want to misspeak. 2 or 3 of the advantages that you have. One of the ones that jumped out at me from the very beginning was the incredible cultural diversity of your diocese. I don't know what a gem you are, how many languages you represent, how diverse your churches are, how diverse you are politically and theologically. The fact that you have maintained at least 10 historically black churches and at least 10 Latino ministries, if I'm counting correctly, is remarkable. I can't think of any diocese in California that has that many, and we have a very high Latino population in our state. So what you have done is quite remarkable, and frankly, very attractive to me. I'm very attracted by a multicultural and multiracial environment, and I find myself being stretched by it and growing as a Christian. And the linguistic diversity is interesting to me. I speak Spanish, and I can lead worship in French for the Haitian Creole congregations. I wouldn't say that I can speak French that well. That theological diversity, I did a lot of extra reading in theology in seminary and in a year at Fordham. And I love the breadth of theology from a variety of cultures and backgrounds, from Karl Barth to James Cone to Gloria Anzaldúa and so on. And so I would thrive in that environment. You have a tradition of social justice, and you seek somebody who's been active in social justice in their ministry, and I think I've told you how I've worked in that area in my profile and so on. And something that I don't know you're aware of, because you live in the midst of it, but you have a culture of honesty and plain-spokenness and transparency, and I'm complimenting you. And I hope you don't mind that I'm like that. But I am like that, and I'm only happy in environments like that. So it feels like a marriage to me in that sense. And then you wanted me to talk about how I leverage those advantages?
How you would leverage those advantages, and also 2 or 3 challenges, and how you would address those challenges.
Yeah, well, I certainly would leverage the culture of honesty and transparency when I got here, to have listening sessions with everybody about what you need from the diocesan offices, and what are the challenges you face, and what are the resources you need, and what strengths do you want uplifted even more. And frankly, I would be learning from you when it comes to your incredible work on racial reconciliation and social justice. So I would be here to learn and support that. In terms of the challenges you have the one challenge that everybody has, which is the changing patterns of attendance and overall engagement with the church post-COVID. And frankly, we're all going to be finding our way through that together in the coming decades. And I look forward to it. So what I would be doing is not attempting to apply a rubber stamp solution to any situation in the church, because every community is unique. And so what I would hope to do is work with you to discern in your community, not only your church community, but in your neighborhood, how you can best spread the good news about Jesus in your midst. One that I'm not sure people are talking about much, but I've certainly heard from some priests about, is that you have churches in zones that are increasingly threatened by new climate threats and rising ocean levels. And I was asked about, problems 5 years out, and I think we should think about problems 20 or 25 years out in the Barrier Islands and Cape May and so on. How are we going to plan for the future? How are we going to move homes if necessary? How are we going to move churches if necessary? That's a very real threat. I'm listening to the news stories about my home state being threatened by flooding after being scarred by fire. One that I learned about yesterday, which I find kind of fascinating, is, in a way it was described to me, was a lack of philanthropy culture. And I noticed there's no staff officer for development, that is for mission and development, raising money. and getting people excited about philanthropy, getting people excited about a capital campaign to raise resources for this diocese, to restore ministries, to call talent here, to support people as they grow in leadership, whether they are lay people or ordained. So that's one of the things I'd be doing, is to look, I've worked in that area of stewardship and growth. I've seen an incredible officer, canon for mission and evangelism, join our diocese in San Diego. And it can be very exciting to turn people onto philanthropy. And when I say that, I don't just mean the members of our churches. I also mean the wider community.
How and why is the Holy Spirit calling you to lead the Diocese of New Jersey?
Let's see. Well, I'll tell you the story. So I've been nominated 3 times to be a bishop, and I found that to be nagging. And on New Year's Day 2022, and I had applied to a diocese. I had been in a previous search. I obviously was not elected. And that friend who had nominated for that one, we were walking along the beach on New Year's Day, which is what you do in San Diego on New Year's Day. And she was chatting about her vocation, and I was saying that I was celebrating the year of staying put, that I was working on the spirituality of staying put, leaning into now my 7th year as a rector at Good Sam, or 6 years as a rector. It's now the 7th year. 7th year. And how those relationships were deepening and how wonderful that was. And she said, you know, Janine, it's wrong to not share your gifts with the wider church if you have those gifts. And I said, yeah, well. And just days later, I don't normally do this, but I tapped into something called the OTM portfolio, which is where people put up jobs they have. And it kind of went, bing, new profile from the Diocese of New Jersey. And right when I clicked on it, that friend called me and said, look, I know you don't want me to keep bugging you about bishop stuff, but the Diocese of New Jersey has just put up their portfolio. And I read it, and I just felt all these bells going off about what you were looking for theological depth in your bishop, looking for somebody with a deep spirituality, looking for somebody comfortable with social justice, but also comfortable in a diocese where people do not all agree on politics and that sometimes don't even want to talk about politics. And I come from a church like that. So I'm very accustomed to that environment and very respectful of the differences and the need to love everybody where they are and to understand and lean into their perspectives as well as I can. There was also an openness to the way you expressed yourself. There was an interesting history of the reporting that there weren't a lot of churches giving a certain amount to the diocese, and that had grown steadily over the years. And that is, once again, an exciting trajectory, an exciting history in the Diocese of New Jersey. And I felt that I could both bring my linguistic gifts to you and also learn from you. And I really need to be in an environment where I too am learning and feeling energized. So really the Holy Spirit called me because I felt through a sense of energy and excitement when I read about you. And I felt that when I met all of you as well. There was an openness to you, a curiosity about you that matches my sense of being wanting to learn and being curious.
There's the thing that goes again.
Sorry, people out there. How do I just... It's kind of... Oh, it flips off, that's why. Yeah. Well.
Thank you, Mother Janine.
Oh, we all done?
You were done.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Our next candidate is the Very Reverend Troy Mendez. He serves as Dean of Trinity Episcopal Cathedral in Phoenix, Arizona.
Hello, everyone. It is a true pleasure to be here with you tonight. Buenas noches a todos. Es un placer estar aquí con ustedes. Gracias.
How will you support diversity, equity, and inclusion and similar efforts in the diocese?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion are fundamentals of our baptismal call. We are charged by our baptismal call to seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving our neighbor as ourselves. And the interesting thing is that our natural, let me say this again. The interesting thing is that sometimes we don't always see all of our neighbors. There is a challenge at times with that, and it is part of our call as Christians to constantly reevaluate how we are in the world. And so as we look at these issues of diversity and inclusion, it is absolutely essential that we look around our neighborhoods and we look around our cities and everywhere that we are and make sure that we are absolutely including everyone in our ministry. Let's think about this. In Luke chapter 12, we have that parable of the great dinner where someone throws a beautiful banquet and starts inviting people in. And what happens? People say, oh, I've got family commitments. I can't do it right now. I'm sorry. I just bought a new piece of land. Not able to make it this time. So what happens is the owner of the house then invites other people and compels people to go out into the lanes and byways and invite people in, because it is Jesus' ultimate teaching about how important it is for us to include absolutely everyone. And when we hone in on the fact that we are to go, we aren't to stay here and drink coffee together, which is awesome, and I love doing that because I'm all about coffee. But the fact of the matter is, we are called to go out. And we, as disciples of Jesus, are called to go out and make disciples as well. And that includes absolutely everyone. So what the church has to then ask ourselves is, who are we not including? And what are we going to do about it? And we need to have times where we look at our past, where we look at our history in the past. There's a great book out right now called Mexico a tres bandas, which in English it has a loose translation called Mexico Decoded. And what it is, it's an entirely retelling of Mexican history. And why is this important? Because the authors of this book, which are all college professors in Mexico, are arguing is that the story of the people of Mexico has been told to the world in such a way that it does not do any favors to the people of Mexico. From a standpoint of the fact that Mexico is a rich country, it's a country that has endless natural resources, but yet at the same time, at times doesn't function well. And in one author's assertion, he used the word insane. Again, their words, not mine. But what he asserts, because he says that, is that it is fundamentally necessary to retell the history as it actually happened, so that you create a foundation that then helps you grow into the truth and grow into a world that you want to see. And that is what our task is, especially in the Christian church in America and the Episcopal Church specifically here in the Diocese of New Jersey, that we have to tell our story in a way that includes the story of everyone, including our African American brothers and sisters, our Spanish-speaking brothers and sisters, our brothers and sisters of all backgrounds, including our Native American brothers and sisters as well, and retell that story in a way that we can then build on that foundation and create structures and plans and dream new dreams, because now we all know where we've come from, and then we get to dream about where we are going. That is the call of that parable of the great dinner. to join Jesus and go out into the lanes, into the byways, and invite everybody in to that great dinner.
According to Matthew 25, we shall be judged by our feeding the hungry, refreshing the thirsty, welcoming strangers, clothing the naked, and visiting the sick and imprisoned. Please give examples of your leadership in this work, and in particular, in assisting prisoners.
Well, I was very fortunate in my very first call to be part of a team in the Diocese of Los Angeles that expanded the prison ministry that the Episcopal Diocese was doing from a mere chaplaincy one-on-one, go visit Episcopalians as they're incarcerated, into a program that formalized the Episcopal Church of one of several groups of people who were allowed every day in the Los Angeles County Jail, which is one of the second largest systems of incarceration in the United States. And through that process, not only did the church commit to going and seeing people in prison, but the church also committed to creating structures such as affordable housing, structures such as transitional housing, where people who come out of prison are then given an opportunity to put their lives back together in a way that they are loved, in a way that they are valued as a human being, in a way that they are then given opportunities to go back out in the world and thrive, which the world is not giving them those opportunities in their past. And that we as Christians are able to convey how much they are truly and intrinsically loved by an unfailingly competent and wholly devoted God in such a way that they cannot falter, they cannot fail anymore, because they know that the church is alongside of them as they bring their entire life and help put it back together. There are so many things that the church can do when it comes to prison ministry. That's one example of many. And the fact of the matter is that in each and every town, wherever we are called to be good stewards of what we have, and that we're called to go out and to minister to all people, including those who are hurting badly, those who are wrongfully imprisoned, those who have been in prison for life. And we are called to always look at this from a role of advocacy as well, advocating for the rights of people as they are incarcerated, giving them fair trials at all times, and insisting on that our justice system treats everybody fairly. It is absolutely imperative. We lead this from our heart. We lead this from our faith. And if we do this together, we will absolutely change our society. We will create new awareness for those who are incarcerated and the plight of the incarcerated. And we can commit as a church to the people who have been incarcerated, that when they are released, that we will be part of the way that they are finding new dignity and respect in the world, because the church is going to be alongside them in their life's journey.
The Episcopal Church is challenged with a rising average age of clergy, and yet we seem to be ordaining fewer younger priests and clergy of color, church-wide, due, in part, to the unsustainable rise in higher education costs and a systemic barrier against younger postulants, aspirants, on the grounds that they lack life experience. How will you encourage and support young people discerning a call to the priesthood or diaconate if elected bishop?
I take great pride that I was part of a team at Virginia Theological Seminary, where I serve as a board member, of creating and overhauling our financial aid structure in such a way that anybody who has less than $150,000 in assets gets their room, their board, their tuition paid, and are given a stipend every year for living expenses, with the commitment that those students are not going to incur any additional educational debt while they are in seminary. That's one thing that is very powerful and very concrete that I know that I have been a part of. But the second piece of this, it deals with my involvement with a group from Atlanta, Georgia called the Forum for Theological Exploration. And what that forum does, what that group, that association does, is they provide resources, especially for college students of color, to discern and discuss how God is calling them into ministry. Now, it's not just a conversation group. These students are invited into these forums where they are taught by world-class experts about the church of the future and what the church looks like. They're given opportunities for worship in ways that their hearts are energized, and they are given opportunities to apply for grants and scholarships that fund part of their educational journey as well. It is an outstanding resource, and it is a resource that the Episcopal Church does not utilize on almost any level. And that is a shame, because the foundation for the Forum for Theological Forum for Theological Exploration, the tenets of that, the foundation of it was initially geared towards mainline Christian religions. It is something that is available at our fingertips, and yet we do not utilize. There are other programs as well. And the fact is that we do need to continue to meet people where they are at. There are a number of initiatives that some of the dioceses and some other church groups are doing where they are starting this process at places like summer camps for kids and helping people see their value, that we can create a new culture of calling people into ministry, because we all need to continue to cultivate more and more ministers. Now, I know in this question it's phrased in such a way of saying that people don't have enough life experience. That is a model of church that started going away about 15 years ago. That 15 years ago, if you're going through the discernment process, you were told, well, if you don't already have a second career, if you haven't already worked a real job of some type, I don't know if you should be called into ministry. But the fact of the matter is that the church needs everyone, and that the church needs people from different backgrounds, different walks of life, and also from different educational experiences, because the heart of the gospel is reaching out to everyone. And the heart of the church's ministry is meeting people where they're at. And why would we not want people in their early 20s being ordained into ministry so that they can minister to people of their same peer group? Why wouldn't we want that? It was an absolute misstep on behalf of the Episcopal Church that when there weren't lots of jobs available for clergy, they quit ordaining people, or they chose to specialize who was being picked, because I can tell you that is absolutely discriminatory, and we have to rewrite this. We have to do it differently in the future, because there are gifts and talents of our young people out there that we have not cultivated, and it is time to cultivate them now.
Based on what you know, name 2 or 3 strengths of our diocese and how you will leverage those strengths. Then please name 2 or 3 challenges and how you will address those challenges.
So the strength of this diocese, I want to say it's this. One of the strengths is location, location, location. You are in municipalities all over this state. There isn't really too much of any pocket where the church isn't there at all. And this is a bonus. This is a good thing, because what it does is it gets you energized and involved and engaged in going, well, we live over here, and there's this school, and there's this ministry that this other church is doing, and there's this other opportunity here, and we get to discern as a church how we're going to be part of it, how we're going to be literally salt of the earth and light to the world. Your location is your absolute strength in being able to be physically present with churches all over the state and become a known entity. The second strength you have is in your clergy and in the people of this diocese. You have people of many different backgrounds, different language groups. You have people who are highly educated, who have the capacity to help you dream dreams that you never thought that you would be able to do. We have the people in this diocese that are fundamentally the best resource that we can imagine in order to accomplish all kinds of new things in our future. The people of this diocese have brought you into, it's very clear that over the last 10 to 15 years, it's very clear how you continue to listen to the call of the Holy Spirit, the call of the Spirit upon your hearts to follow where the Spirit is leading you into new types of ministries. We have heard about some of the most fantastic ministries this morning, from feeding programs to yesterday hearing all about ECS and how there are so many new opportunities for being able to go out and serve the people of God wherever they may be. You have the location, you have the people. Now, when it comes to the challenges of this diocese, I think there's two things. The first one I want to bring up is that I think, as it is very clear in the Episcopal Church in general and in our country, that we have to talk about race and we have to practice anti-racism and techniques, and we have to change our hearts on who we are and how we see people, that we honor everyone in the image and likeness of God in such a way that we are empowering people that are all around us, and that we are taking strategies to identify people in the midst of our communities, and we are raising them up as new leaders, that we are raising them up to be ministers of the gospel for us in lay ministries, in ordained ministries, but we have to do a better job of telling our story, the stuff that isn't particularly fun to talk about, and the stuff that we can dream about that's our potential for the future. That is absolutely essential. The second piece of this is something else. It's structure. New Jersey is the second oldest diocese in the United States. And if you think about ancient cities, like ancient Roman cities, like when you go to the Holy Land, you're up here and you'll go down a set of stairs and people will be like, oh, this is the road that Jesus walked. And you're like, well, why is it below? We were up ahead. Why are we below? And it's because before there were bulldozers, if you needed to build something else, you filled something in with dirt and built on top of it. And we have a lot of dirt to dig out. We have a lot of dirt. We've got to peel back layers of structures that were put on one on top of another, as with good intentions. Nobody was doing this maliciously, with good intentions. But what we have to do is, in the future, we have to unravel these layers. And we have to do it in such a way that helps us not only simplify a little bit, but to think about how we achieve our core mission and ministry, because we are running a leaner, meaner, greener, and a more caring, compassionate organization.
How and why is the Holy Spirit calling you to lead the Diocese of New Jersey?
I have been so moved by everything that I read about New Jersey, that I heard about New Jersey. The first time I heard about New Jersey, I thought, this is worth looking at. And I have to tell you that my initial response was, I was interested feeling-wise, but my thoughts weren't adding up. I was like, why am I feeling so drawn to this? And as I continued to pray and discern and to read a little bit more, I started seeing how the people of this diocese, how they have been present here for several hundred years, and how they have continued to bring forth the good news of the gospel, the good news of Jesus, into so many communities all over the state. And I felt very drawn to being the Bishop of New Jersey because of the fact that we have the capacity to proclaim good news to the world. We have the locations, we have the strength, and I feel that through my ministries that I've had in the past, I got to tell you this. I have always purposely chosen ministries. Well, no, I take that back. I have chosen some ministries, and then God has had another opportunity of calling me to other ministries than I had ever anticipated. But I got to tell you this. I have often found myself working in ministries in very eclectic environments. Environments where no two people are alike, where no two churches are alike, where politically people are in very different places, where socioeconomically people are on very different levels, and I have thrived in that environment. I like that environment. I think it's fun. I think it can be really energizing because there are so many opportunities. I'm sorry, I keep moving this microphone. There are so many opportunities to do good ministry, to be the people of God in the world. And I see that Jesus calls us to unite. And one of the aspects of bishop is to be an instrument of unity in the diocese. And I think that my own ministerial experience, not only on the educational level at Virginia Theological Seminary, but also in my role as the Dean of the Cathedral, I currently do many projects around my diocese where I have to rally people from congregations that are very different than mine. And the people that work with me always have fun. The people that work with me find some type of spiritual meaning in what we're doing together. And the people that work with me also know that they are valued as beloved children of God. And that God is bringing us together to teach us something. The spectrum of God is beyond our imagination. And each one of us is part of that spectrum of God. And when we look at what we can do together, and we look out in rooms such as this one, or rooms of other congregations, whatever size of the congregation, we are seeing a spectrum of God that we are otherwise not seeing. And that is absolutely vital in furthering our ministry together, is to appreciate, to honor, to cherish, and to empower every single one of us who is in this room to be the children of God as God has called us to be.
Thank you, Dean Troy. Our next candidate is the Reverend Canon Dr. Dina Cleaver Bartholomew. She is the canon to the ordinary in the Diocese of Rhode Island. She also serves as Bishop Nicely's Chief of Staff.
Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight, for taking time out of your busy schedule. Thank you also to the church for your hospitality.
How will you support diversity, equity, and inclusion and similar efforts in the diocese?
I think it's essential to support diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the diocese, and that can be done in a number of different ways. I think the first and most important way is to model it on diocesan staff, because we set the tone for expectations by doing it ourselves. So to me, that means looking at who is already serving on staff and knowing that, unfortunately, several of them plan to retire fairly soon. So there will be openings without having to ask anyone to leave. And that we will have the opportunity to consider a wide array of applicants. And I would actively encourage a wide array of applicants from different racial and ethnic groups, from different ages and varieties of backgrounds, those who are LGBTQ and otherwise inclined. We would look at a wide array of candidates and their skills. And I think that is the foundation of setting expectations for other people to do the same. In my current role as canon to the ordinary, I'm the person who oversees the matching of clergy and churches. So as the transition ministry officer, I currently engage in this practice when seeking clergy candidates for church openings in our diocese. And that means that our recent openings have included a variety of different kinds of candidates for churches to interview. And we encourage churches quite openly to be prayerful, thoughtful, and inclusive in their interviewing and hiring and calling processes, both for clergy and for lay employees. It also extends to lay leadership, so that people who are in lay ministries of a variety of different backgrounds can be raised up as visible ministers within the diocese.
According to Matthew 25, we shall be judged by our feeding the hungry, refreshing the thirsty, welcoming strangers, clothing the naked, and visiting the sick and imprisoned. Please give examples of your leadership in this work, and in particular, in assisting prisoners.
Long ago, when I was but a deacon, I served at St. Luke's in Atlanta, which is an urban parish in a neighborhood that responds directly to the needs of those who are among our neediest. We had a soup kitchen in which I served, a medical clinic for the homeless, mailboxes for the homeless, a counseling center, an economic development corporation, and a number of other ways to address those who had tangible needs. So some of those I served in directly, others I supported either through working occasionally, working with colleagues, or supporting lay ministries in those places. I have also served in a number of other congregations where we responded to the needs in our contexts. And those included, in almost every place I've been, some kind of feeding ministry, whether it was a soup kitchen or a food pantry within the church or a food pantry in the community. And some of those, as in Akron, they have a huge one called Open M, which is shared by a constellation of churches of different denominations, and has a number of social workers on staff who can really assess the needs of people there, as well as a legal staff. And all the churches pool their funding to help support. And I was the person who was in charge of the administering the discretionary fund to help both Open M and parishioners and those who came to our doors seeking assistance. So I did a lot of that sort of more administrative level response when I was in Akron. At my own church, I served on the board of the local food pantry, and it expanded its ministry as the need grew beyond food to literacy and support for pro bono legal work, as well as some other social assistance. We also did some minimal work with a white-collar level jail that was in the town next to us. And again, my ministry there was more to support my colleagues in that ministry than a direct ministry that I provided myself. In the Diocese of Rhode Island as the canon to the ordinary, I just had the pleasure last week of receiving an inquiry from the chaplain for our prison ministry saying, we want to start a new class for the inmates at the ACI, and we don't have any funding for it. And within 3 hours, I was able to locate funding to purchase books for all the students in the class. And to the chaplain's delight, we found an extra $500 for them to keep in line for ordering future books for the same class. But we have a very active ministry for the prison that is in Rhode Island. And we have both the chaplain there and a cadre of lay volunteers and deacons who take turns serving at the prison. I've also served in other ministries for those who are in need, mostly helping them find ways to make ministry possible rather than myself providing direct services, but often working with deacons who do just that, including when I was in Akron working with a deacon on staff who worked with the elderly whose needs often went unseen, including providing durable medical equipment, in-home services. The part I often provided was pastoral care, going to visit people who had not been seen and who were often invisible, and sometimes having to follow up with social services to make sure that they got ongoing care.
The Episcopal Church is challenged with a rising average age of clergy, and yet we seem to be ordaining fewer younger priests and clergy of color, church-wide, due in part to the unsustainable rise in higher education costs and a systemic barrier against younger postulants, aspirants, on the grounds that they lack life experience. How would you encourage and support young people discerning a call to the priesthood or diaconate if elected bishop?
Long ago, and somewhat far away, I was young and seeking ordination.
Oh boy.
So I first discerned a call to ordination when I was 11 in the confirmation class. Priest, poor man, first call, had us go around in that circle and say, and what do you want to do when you grow up? And for the first time in my life, I said out loud, I want to be a priest. And he paused in his wisdom in Southern Virginia in his first call, when women couldn't be ordained yet, and said, by the time you grow up, that shouldn't be a problem. Now, I can't say the path was all that smooth, but there were always people along the way who wanted to make it more possible. And I want to be that person who makes it more possible for others. So, after I was ordained as a young person, I returned to the Diocese of Atlanta because I'd served at St. Luke's as a deacon, gone out to California where my husband did his doctoral studies, returned to the Diocese of Atlanta, and they called me and said, we would like to start a new program because since the church in its wisdom told all those young people to go home because the baby boomers had filled all the available positions, we no longer have young applicants. And so we're starting a new program called Discerning Young Vocations Experience. Dive. Catchy. And they asked me to be one of the 3 people who worked in this program where they could trot us out as living examples of you too can be ordained under the age of 30. I was the lone female example. And I worked with them 1 month every weekend with high school, college, and recent college graduates and other people who were in that age group, they were in vocational studies or working or in the military, to come and do discernment work with us. And we invited them. Sometimes they sought us out, sometimes we sought them out, and we went through a discernment process with them in small groups. And probably about half of them went on to be ordained. So I think a program like that, where we can continue to seek out people and encourage ordination, is a really important thing, and that is something I have done all throughout my ministry. As a canon to the ordinary, one of my jobs is going around the diocese and visiting all the churches, and I watch people, and whatever their age is, I ask them about their ministries, and if they've thought, when I see it, have you thought about being a deacon? Have you thought about being a priest? I see a gift for music ministry in you. Have you thought about a future in music ministry? Often people are like, me? But sometimes they have that look like, I didn't think anyone else could tell. I've done that with my confirmation classes. And sometimes I hand them a Bible and I say, if you ever want to talk, because I see potential in you, we can help discern your call together, wherever it may be that God is leading you, but I see God at work in you. And I do that in every context where I am. I mean, I do that regardless of age, but I make a special effort with age. I've really worked, my younger ministry, they always expected the associate to do the youth work. So I have an extensive background in youth work. But also, as a rector, I worked with the youth directly in confirmation, on the confirmation retreat, where we did a deep dive into exploring ministry, vocation, and call. And I would expect to continue doing that kind of work. In my present job, I work with the Commission on Ministry, and that's part of what I do with them, including the fact that we have a senior warden who's 24 years old, black, and gay at one of our churches. And he and I have somewhat regular conversations about his discernment process. And guess who invited him to be one of the lectors at Diocesan Convention this year? Yes. So this is the way we lift up young people, people of color, LGBTQ candidates, say, we see something in you. So there are certainly ways to do this. Also, funding things like campus ministry, vacation Bible schools, ministries with colleges and universities that are near our churches, and, I don't know, summer camps. In the Diocese of Rhode Island, our summer camp is one of the greatest producers of people who go on to feel that they have been seen and called into a deeper relationship with God. So there are myriad ways we can approach this.
How and why is the Holy Spirit calling you? Based on what you know, name 2 or 3 strengths of our diocese and how you will leverage those strengths. Then please name 2 or 3 challenges and how you will address those challenges.
I feel like I need to have a whiteboard like a certain famous representative to keep a list. One of the foremost things I noted about you when I read your profile is that you're clear about 2 things. First is the centrality of your faith in Jesus Christ. And to me, that's where everyone needs to begin, because otherwise we're off center. And because you have grounded yourselves in the centrality of your faith in Jesus and the importance of being formed as disciples, I see that as central to being able to move forward to be and do anything else. Because we have to be grounded in our faith in Jesus Christ and willing to be formed ourselves before we can turn and make a difference in the larger world. So that is one of the great strengths I see in you and one of the reasons I responded to your profile. Another strength I see is the fact that you are so diverse. You see your unity in that central faith and desire to be formed as disciples, and you also recognize your diversity, not only geographically throughout different kinds of cities, towns, and villages through a state that has lots of different geography, right? New Jersey is not all one thing, as people in the north, south, and central parts will tell you, and way down there in Cape May and way up there in Elizabeth, and how it's different in Princeton than it is in Haddonfield, right? You all know your own uniqueness, but you don't always know how best to share that with your neighbors, how best to be in relationship with your neighbors. The flip side of having a lot of diversity is knowing how to engage that, see it as a gift, hold it up, and invite others to share in it and partner with you. That's the flip side or the challenge that comes with the diversity. Another strength that I see in you is your willingness to experiment and try new things. In your profile and in the things I have heard from people as we've gone around the diocese, there are bubbled up stories of all kinds of ministries that have been born out of responsiveness to the context where you are. I mean, we went to 2 churches earlier today that were responsive to their communities, both in a substantial food ministry and Christmas in Camden, right? 2 amazing things. And I don't know, I would never have thought of Christmas in Camden, and we were all just totally amazed by this wonderful ministry. But what it means is that you've got all these gifts and talents that come up, and you've clearly made room for them and honored them. But then the next step in the challenge is building the scaffolding to support and encourage them, finding ways to help them be sustained over the long haul and to also be adaptable. So one of the things that I engaged in my previous parish when we hit a financial crisis that I inherited when I came in, and they said, guess what? There's a $477,000 construction loan that's due in 18 months, and we don't have a plan. My hair curled even more than it already does. So we got creative and we developed the resource development team. It started with me, the senior warden, and 3 other people, and we said, we are willing to try almost anything. And we are going to erase the word failure from our vocabulary because they were really anxious about failing. And I said, we try something. If it works, great. If it doesn't, we've learned something. Sometimes we learn we don't want to do that again. Sometimes we learn we need to tweak that and try it another way. Sometimes we learn, wow, that went really well. Can we expand on that? So I even created an award, 2 of them, One was the Pentecost Person Award, gave out every Pentecost for someone in whom we saw the Holy Spirit at work, to hold up all kinds of models of ways that people can approach things in the church. And the other was the Took a Risk Award. And I handed that out one year when the two guys who formed the Lenten Fish Fry had finished all their extensive planning, including which kind of batter to use on what kind of fish. Very extensive planning. I gave out the award at our January annual meeting. The fish fries started in February. So they came up and got their crosses with the ichthus on them for the fish fry. And the senior warden looked at me and said, but how are you giving us an award for something when you don't even know if it will work? And I said, it is the Took a Risk Award, not the You Already Succeeded Award. So sometimes what we need to be able to do, as with your case, is you're out there taking risks. We want to help you with that.
Now, how and why is the Holy Spirit calling you to lead the Diocese of New Jersey?
Why, thank you. Well, I will just say I've often said it's because she has a sense of humor. So I opened my computer one day at work and was greeted by an email from one of the members of your search committee saying, congratulations, a different bishop, not my bishop, a different bishop whom I know but not that well, has nominated you for the search process in the Diocese of New Jersey, which is how I found out you were in the search process. And I laughed out loud because it was so completely unexpected. But because I have learned that the Holy Spirit often knows far better than I do, and that in her presence I should be humble and open, I went and pulled up your profile and read it, and prayed, and reread it, and talked with my esteemed discerning companion, my husband David, and then my wise circle of friends and my spiritual director, and they said, yes. So I entered into discernment with you, because I know often the Holy Spirit knows far better than I do, and that my job in response to her leading is to follow, to be as open as I possibly can, to pray and listen and learn, to ask others to pray and to tell them I truly do appreciate it, because discernment is never done alone. And to my honor, I am here with you, continuing in that process of discernment and seeing every step along the way more wonder, more amazing things, more incredible people, more energy, more hopefulness, more possibility. And I believe that the Holy Spirit continues to call me to be in conversation with you, because I believe this relationship is possible, and that God wouldn't have placed me here unless it were.
Thank you, Ken and Dina.
Thank you very much.
Our next candidate is the Reverend Canon Dr. Sally French. She currently serves as Canon for Regional Ministry and Collaborative Innovation in the Diocese of North Carolina.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It's great to be here, and thank you so much. I realize that I am all that's standing between you and the parking lot. So I appreciate the energy and enthusiasm I can feel in this room, and I'm grateful for those who have joined in online as well. I'd also like to introduce you briefly to my husband, Clark, who is sitting in the back corner and wondering why I'm calling him out. But I'm glad to be with you tonight.
How will you support diversity, equity, and inclusion and similar efforts in the diocese?
As I was preparing for these meet and greet times, I worked my way through every diocesan congregation's website that I could find. And I was struck by a couple of things. Some churches are already doing the work to acknowledge and name and share about their history of racism and bias. I think in particular of Christ Church Shrewsbury, which has listed on the website all that they've uncovered about their difficult and painful past. It's really compelling work, and it's worth looking at. I know Trinity Princeton has a PhD student who's doing some research on that, and I was struck by the way that these congregations are trying to gather and learn and reckon with their history and their legacy. In the business world, conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion often begin with a workshop, seminar, certification, or staff appointment, right? We're not the business world, we are the church. And in the church, we begin these conversations not with technical checklists, but with relationship and connection and acknowledgement and sharing. So I love that some of that work is already underway, the work to acknowledge and claim and share even the difficult history. And I would suggest that at this time, one of the next steps for the Diocese of New Jersey will be to do the work of reckoning with the history of racism and bias through a racial justice audit. I don't think you've done that work yet. I think you've done some of it, but I know that there are ways to gather that information together for the whole community, to do the work, to examine and reflect and learn together. It's only when we've started to face and acknowledge what has happened in the past that we can address the needs and concerns of the present and work towards justice and work towards diversity, equity, and inclusion in our congregations and communities and at the diocesan level. I can think of a few areas in which that work is important and will need to be addressed. And I can think of a few things that if you were to call me as your bishop, I would prioritize. One of those things is to have conversations with the people who are already engaged in places where there are issues of equity and justice. I think about the people who are working with the Black church ministries, the people who are working to support Latino congregations. I think about the people who are part of the racial justice education group and those doing work on reparations in the diocese. The clergy and the lay leaders serving congregations that experience bias and discrimination, and the places where there is an obvious need for more work and more conversation to address diversity, equity, and inclusion in the church and in the communities around. I wonder about the ordination process. I was delighted to hear that you now have 2 people in process for ordination to the priesthood who only speak Spanish. But I know from my work in North Carolina that it's often very difficult to raise up different vocations and congregations of diversity, that the ways that people are called forward for ordained ministry are different depending on their cultural background and on the ways that the community works together. If you were to call me as your bishop, I would be your ally and advocate. I would listen to you. I would trust you when you tell me your experience as a diocese, as congregations, and as individuals. And I would work to further the possibility of more just, more equitable, and more inclusive and compassionate communities. Isn't that what the Episcopal Church is all about? Creating communities of inclusion and compassion. And I'm getting the red pattern.
According to Matthew 25, we shall be judged by our feeding the hungry, refreshing the thirsty, welcoming strangers, clothing the naked, and visiting the sick and imprisoned. Please give examples of your leadership in this work, and in particular, in assisting prisoners.
Thank you. Before I was even a seminarian, my journey to ordained ministry was relatively short from baptism to ordination. I was baptized as an undergraduate student and went from my undergraduate degree into formation for ordained ministry. Before I was even a seminarian, that work of justice and in fulfillment of Matthew 25 was something that really touched my heart. I can remember as an undergraduate, I served on our, it was in Toronto, in Canada, in the downtown of the deanery, so the equivalent of the convocation. I took one of those positions that none of the other students wanted, and I became the representative there. And so I got to work with a feeding program for the homeless that met at 6 a.m. on Sunday mornings in a small church in the middle of nowhere in Toronto. And I remember that I had this crazy idea that if we asked some of the companies for shoes, they would send us shoes for people who were homeless. And I did, only I didn't tell the church. And so 2,000 pairs of shoes turned up one day to be distributed to those in need in the community. It was a tremendous gift and blessing. It was also a great opportunity to learn about process and protocols. I have a heart for this ministry, and it has been something that I have always loved and enjoyed, and I've always found opportunities to do it. I've always sought out and responded to calls to congregations that had a connection in the community doing that work somehow, something that was hands-on acts of loving service for those in need in whatever form. You mentioned prison ministry, and that's a particularly challenging ministry, I think, because the policies and your ability to engage with those who are in prison varies so much depending on not just on the state, but on the municipality, the township, the city where things might be located. So in my time on staff at St. Philip's in Durham, North Carolina, we had a wonderful ministry with the Durham County Jail, which was a very difficult place to be. And it was difficult for a number of reasons, one of which was that those who were in charge of the jail would change the rules and our ability to access the prisoners, sometimes with no notice whatsoever. So we had a group of folks, a group of lay people who went every week, and if they could get in, they would, and if they couldn't, they would find other ways to support. So collecting Bibles or greeting cards and calendars and finding ways to engage and support those who were in prison was important there. I think of a senior warden I worked with in a congregation just last year who had this deep call to provide Bible studies by mail to prisoners. So he would mail off a Bible study, kind of a circular letter form, and he just did this wherever it was invited. And so the question becomes really how we can support people who are doing creative and innovative forms of ministry, and I love hearing the stories and lifting those up. I think it might be really exciting to talk to the people here who are already doing this work and find out what's already happening in your communities and congregations and the ways that this could be supported, empowered, and lifted up for the glory of God and for the spread and continuation of this work.
The Episcopal Church is challenged with a rising average age of clergy, and yet we seem to be ordaining fewer younger priests and clergy of color church-wide, due in part to the unsustainable rise in higher education costs and a systemic barrier against younger postulants, aspirants, on the grounds that they lack life experience. How will you encourage and support young people discerning a call to the priesthood or diaconate if elected bishop?
So I was one of those young vocations that was told that I lacked life experience. And I had a bishop, by the grace of God, who ordained me anyway, and I think it kind of worked. So, I recognize that there are challenges for people who come to the ordination process, either younger than we anticipate or from different backgrounds than we might be looking for, from different socioeconomic situations with different educational backgrounds. I recognize that those challenges are real and that they create obstacles and issues for people to continue through the process. I also believe, because I've worked a little bit at the Divinity School at Duke in North Carolina, in Durham, North Carolina, where I spent 2 years serving as a spiritual director for some of the MDiv students, those in the ordination process. And because I'm a little familiar with what's happening here at Princeton Theological Seminary, there are actually a number of younger vocations coming through for ordination these days, and that one of the things that the church is now doing is already finding ways to raise up and support those young voices. I also recognize that in many cases, those younger vocations don't necessarily look like they did when I went through 22, 23, 24 years ago, or even when people went through 50 years ago. They might be people of color, they might be members of the LGBTQ community, they might be people who represent different parts of our wider church. And so it's really important to create pathways that will encourage and support those vocations as they come forward. If you were to call me as your bishop, I think one of the things there is to begin the conversation with those who are already at work on the ordination process, to see where there is a need, where there are backlogs in the process, where there is the potential for new things to happen and for new ministries and new visions to come forward. I also think it's really important to support those who have already begun the process, to ensure that they have access to the resources that they need, especially if they come from a place where perhaps they don't have a lot of money, and most 22-year-olds don't have a lot of money as they begin a process, so that there's not just education provided and care for that, but also opportunities for housing, or for the students who take longer than 3 years. How do we give them a space to live, an opportunity to serve in a congregation, perhaps a stipend for that? I would love to talk about ways to pair up some of the seminarians that I know are there here in this diocese with some of the area congregations. Wouldn't it be wonderful to see if there was a way to take the energy that those young people are bringing, or those people who represent different backgrounds and different cultures and different races? Wouldn't it be wonderful to take that energy and connect it to some of our smaller congregations to provide support and care and formation for those students, and connection and ongoing building up of relationship? I think that would be just a fabulous way to begin that conversation. It might also be worthwhile, though, to think about the ways that we recruit diversity in our vocations, and think about the ways that we go out and connect with congregations and with people who might have the gifts to serve the church. I believe that we have a lot more deacons in our pews than we've recognized, and that's one vocation. And I also believe that we don't always do a good job of acknowledging the importance of a lay vocation. It's not second prize because your ordination process didn't work out. It is a vibrant and vital calling in the church, and I think some work to clarify roles and orders and to provide clear paths for ministry that are engaging and fulfilling and life-giving for people, I think that work might be very worthwhile in raising up not only younger vocations, but also in supporting those vocations we already have, and encouraging a broader and more diverse body for the future of the clergy in the church.
Based on what you know, name 2 or 3 strengths of our diocese and how you will leverage those strengths. Then please name 2 or 3 challenges and how you will address those challenges.
Oh, that is a good question. And I have been thinking about this. Your strengths. The people of this diocese are a tremendous strength, not only in terms of the ministries you are already doing, but the diversity that you embody. You represent the state around you in a way that is remarkable. Michael Curry was my bishop for some years in North Carolina before he took a different job somewhere. And he always used to talk about how our churches needed to look like the communities around. Now, I think that a lot of the churches in New Jersey do. Not every congregation, but certainly enough of them. And together, the diversity of this diocese, the people, the passions, and the strength and the witness that you all bring together, I think that's a wonderful strength. And the way to leverage that is to work together on evangelism. Evangelism isn't one of those scary things that we don't want to do. It's just getting better at talking to our neighbors. I can tell the work that I do now, I work with a lot of vestries, and I know the difference between a vestry that talks together about their faith and about Jesus, and a vestry that says a quick token prayer at the beginning of the meeting and then moves on. If we can't talk to the people that we love, that love us, about our faith, then how are we going to talk to the world around? So I'd love to talk to you about how we can model that kind of relationship, to build on and leverage the strength of the people of the diocese. Another strength of this diocese, I think, is the congregational work that's already underway. We saw a feeding program this morning in Camden at St. Wilfrid's that was phenomenal. We learned about the Camden Christmas outreach to children. And there are countless ministries. In this part of the diocese, I think about the ways that you gather together for food pantries and community service, and the witness that you already offer. That's gospel work and that is a strength. And the way to leverage that strength is to start to share the good news together, to learn from one another about what's happening that's going well in one place, to take those models of what might work in one congregation and adapt them to the unique circumstances of another. Is that 3 strengths or 2? We're at 2. Okay, my third strength is your buildings. You have these wonderful buildings that probably sometimes feel like a burden, but they are located in places where they're ready to receive the community and where there is potential with just the real estate that's there. If we can get the professionals in who know how to work with buildings, these aren't churchy people, but if we can get these people in and have conversations with them about how best to use the properties that we have, I think there's a lot possible. And I'll tell you about a congregation in Durham, North Carolina, that when we brought in the professionals to have a conversation about their property and their building, discovered that they had resources they didn't know about, and they were able to start to think more creatively about how to position themselves on their lot. It wasn't just how do we get the money to fix the $500,000 repairs. It was, do we need that building? Could we do our work if we relocated things to this? How can we consider that? It was a wonderful conversation that opened up life-giving possibilities for the congregation. I'm totally going to run out of time, but I need a couple of challenges as well, right? Okay, so one challenge here, I think, is administration and communications. I think there are some needs for clearer structure and for structures that support and sustain the mission and ministry of the church. Another challenge in this diocese, I think, is that because you don't always hear the stories of things that are happening, sometimes it's hard to be hopeful in some of these circumstances, and it makes it hard to discern the priorities. The response to both of those in terms of leveraging is to engage in a process of discernment around common mission together. The bishop's role is to listen and gather the information from the community and then to work to lead the body of Christ to discern what is rising up in terms of what is next. I don't think it's the bishop's role to come in and place something on you, but rather to pull out the wisdom that is already present in the community. I think it would be a wonderful exercise in to gather that information, to do that discernment, and to see where the Spirit is leading and calling the Diocese of New Jersey. Thank you, Jeff.
How and why is the Holy Spirit calling you to lead the Diocese of New Jersey?
I began my discernment for the episcopate when someone who's a priest in this diocese told me that they thought I should consider it, and also that I should consider the episcopate specifically for New Jersey. My discernment around the episcopate has always been about Bishop of New Jersey. I've never been in one of these walkabout meet and greet situations before, and so it's been a marvelous and remarkable experience, and God has been present to me throughout the experience, from the beginning stages of the discernment to the place where I was, submitting responses to questions and signing myself up for discernment retreats and things like that. It has been powerful and profound. This is the first time where all of my different pieces of experience have come together in one particular thing. I have had a series, I've always served the church. I've been ordained for 22 years, and in that time, I haven't had the sort of begin here, end here, oh, congratulations, here's an Episcopal election for you kind of trajectory. It didn't work that way. I've had, serving on staff at a large cathedral where I learned how cathedrals work and what it's like to be in an urban center, to serving as an interim rector in some places where I learned the ins and outs of congregations that are changing, to serving, we called them yoked, but you call them affiliated congregations, to working in small farming rural communities and as the priest in charge, to serving as an associate in a different type of setting. I've served in pretty much everything the church offers. I've done it at some point. And this is the first time where all of the skills and the gifts that came from that make sense. And I've learned what it means to be in a small congregation, in a medium-sized congregation, in a large congregation, and to deal with the complexity of systems. I've learned what it means to serve on a diocesan staff and the gifts that come from that. and seeing that in a parish you deal with one system, and maybe the diocese as well. But for a bishop, it's many systems together. And so all of my experiences kind of add together to make this appealing and something that seems like it might fit. And then I have to tell you that I wasn't expecting this, but at the discernment retreat in October, I had one of the most profound spiritual experiences of my life. Throughout the retreat, I was aware that I thought I was seeing the giftedness of the people and the ways the diocese was so engaged, and just the sheer joy of everyone in sharing who you are and what it's about to be in New Jersey. And I realized that, sometimes when you're praying, you get a glimpse of the way that God so loves the world that it is almost painful. You can feel the power and the tenderness and the vulnerability of God's infinite compassion and mercy and love. I have to tell you that I had that all the way through the retreat for you. It was so powerful. I didn't know what it was. It was grounding and centering, which is good because the retreat was a tiny bit stressful. But I also couldn't even put words to it until I left. And I realized that what I had seen was the belovedness of this place, that God so loves you. And God was inviting me to partner in that and love you as well. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means, congratulations, start looking at purple clothing. I'm not quite willing to stake that. But I do know that it is an invitation to join in this conversation with you, and that I am delighted and overjoyed to be here in this room having this conversation tonight. I don't know where it goes, but I know that I am infinitely better for it, having seen you and met you and connected with you, and that I am so full of hope for the church and the way that you are all living out the gospel call in the Diocese of New Jersey, that you've inspired me just by inviting me into this conversation. So that is why I feel called to be in this conversation to discern for Bishop of New Jersey.
Thank you, Canon Sally. Thank you. This concludes the question part of this evening's session. Thank you to each of our candidates for your thoughtful answers. Thank you to everyone in attendance this evening. Special thank you to the Search and Transition Committees for their work in the process thus far. Again, we want to thank everyone here at Holy Trinity South River for their gracious hospitality, particularly the Reverend Greg Bazilla, Rector, the Reverend Deacon Bridget Pincelli, Deacon Jerry Welch, who is visiting deacon for Latino ministry, the wardens, Mr. Meyer Pincelli, Senior Warden, Mr. Clint Williams, Junior Warden, the vestry, and the parish. I want to give a special thanks to our technological advisor, Canon Steve Welch. And a special thank you to our translator this evening, our beloved friend from the Diocese of Newark, the Reverend Hilario Albert, who has been in the sacristy translating into Spanish. Our next candidate forum session will be held at 6:30 p.m. tomorrow evening at St. Luke's Church, Gladstone. This forum will also be live streamed and recorded. For those details, I encourage you to visit the Search and Transition website, www.bishopsearchnj.org. And as a reminder, the candidates' resumes, sermons, and answers to previously submitted questions are also on bishopsearchnj.org. We now invite you to engage in conversation with our candidates and with each other. Good night, and may God bless as we all travel safely home.